Today's guest is presented by C.R. Crawford Construction.
This podcast is powered by Lindsey and Associates.
Powered by Lindsey. And we've got an incredible guest on today, Coach Schoonover from Ole Miss. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys.
Well, we've been wanting to get you on, man. You're an interesting guy. You're the special teams, probably one of the top special teams coaches in the country. All you got to do is get the categories out on kickoff, return, punt, all the good things, and your name has been with it. But let's go back where it all started, back in Mount City, Missouri. Now, you grew up. Your dad was a farmer. Your mom was a Hall of Fame volleyball coach. You grew up with, a couple of brothers that were into coaching, and your sister was an outstanding athlete also. And then you were an outstanding athlete. And talk to us a little bit how competitive the family was and how tough it was growing up in that environment.
Well, I can see you've been talking to Jared already.
Yeah,
so
I got all the good stuff. I got the good. I'm gonna ask the hard questions too. Here we go.
I got you. Well, no, yeah, middle of five. Like you said, dad farmer. My dad was an All-American at William Jewell up there in Kansas City. He was, back in the day when you played nose guard and fullback. That's what kind of the makeup he had. And then he was also on the basketball team there at Jewell as well. And then he was actually the first women's basketball coach at Jewell. And they were not a sanctioned school sport yet. It was club sport, work, transition in all that. But that was kind of his first, first taste of coaching in our family. And then my mom, she was a college athletic trainer there at Missouri Western, and actually did a little coaching there right out of college as well with Missouri Western. But when they got married, my dad's farmer, my mom stayed at home mom for a while there until she became a special ed teacher, and then like you said, volleyball coach, won over 300 games and had a great career doing that. So, and then my dad coached us all growing up at everything. So coaching was kind of always around us and always a part of it. And whether you're getting coached on reading the Bible or coached on shooting a jumper, you were getting coached on something. So that was kind of how we were raised. And I think that's probably a thing that my family, my kids, we kind of have a little thing we go through about. With my 9, 6, and 1-year-old about who we are, what do we do, who do we serve, and there, you're going to hear Jesus compete and hard all in there. So that was kind of put in our family as we were little too, and then competition is probably one of the lost arts of our society right now, is learning how to compete in everything you do. So absolutely grew up in Mountain City, Missouri, real small town. Again, just you played ball year round, 4 sports, whatever season it was, that was what we were doing. So did a lot of that, and then played in Missouri Western there, in St. Joe, Missouri, D2. Played linebacker. Had a lot of fun playing. My brother above me, Jonathan, I was with him for 2 years there at Missouri Western, and then of course you mentioned Callie. She was a point guard there for 4 years, and then my youngest brother James also played there until he hurt his back. And actually, Jared was committed there before the coach left and went down to West Texas A&M, and he went with him. So, Missouri Western was kind of in our blood a little bit and close to home there. So, played there for 5 years with the redshirt year. Played a couple years of arena football, and actually my brother Jonathan played arena football down there for the Twisters in Little Rock, and got to play that for a couple years out in Peoria, Illinois, and just kind of talking coaching path. My first year of coaching, the arena season was spring and summer. So I went and did that in the spring and summer, and then came back and coached them all at Missouri Western for a year, just, basically working for a meal plan and helping out with the DNs there. And then I was not going to play another year, but my arena coach had kind of sold it that he'd help me network a little bit to expand, because I didn't know anybody outside the building I played in. And so he talked me playing back out another year of arena ball, and had made some. It's kind of funny how God works. Made some big promises about buildings he was going to get me in as a GA, and went back out with that in mind. I didn't have any disillusions about playing the NFL or anything, but I thought, hey, there's a chance to play some ball, get paid for it, and network a little bit. So I went back out, and the idea was I was going to be a GA at Illinois State. Well, I was naive in the world and in the business, and thought, well, if you said it, it was just going to happen. So I went out and went ahead and enrolled myself at Illinois State before I'd even have a conversation with anyone at Illinois State. Enrolled myself in grad school and was playing arena ball and sitting there waiting, 2-3 months. All of a sudden it's hitting March, April, and I'm like, hey, I haven't had a conversation with anybody over there yet. So I actually just drove over there one day and walked in the building and ironically, the secretary at Illinois State was from around the same area I was from, and just struck up a conversation and knew some randomly sane people, and she just made sure I got in front of the head coach as I walked in the door, and so I went in and talked to him and realized very quickly that the connections I thought I had with him were not very as firm as I had been told. So I said, you know what, I'll just volunteer if you'll let me. So I volunteered there at Illinois State for a spring with the mindset I'd get on money in the fall. Came to find out there was no money available for GAs at all. So I ended up volunteering for about 1.5 years.
Can I stop you? Is a little bit during that time period, you're very successful and very determined and very driven person. And you've seen guys, you've seen go that wavering process. There ain't no check coming in. You're spending all these hours. Talk to me a little bit, especially our young coaches out there, about your mindset during that process.
Well, one, it goes back to what I was talking about, how you're being raised. You better have some competition, some toughness, some grit in your background. You better have some faith in your background and believing in something you can't see, because there was a lot of days and nights where it was rough. And I was a third roommate in a 2-bedroom apartment. I slept in a closet for about 2 years. I sold Advocare on the side. I don't remember Advocare or not, but direct sales supplements. And they had this huge bubble wrap, this really thick bubble wrap. And so every time I made a sale, my bed got a little softer because that's what I was sleeping on. I'd throw a comforter over top of it. I ran a wire through the closet, so I had a little TV in there, and I had everything I owned in that closet, and could fit in a Chevy Cavalier, 2-door Chevy Cavalier. So you just kind of, in my mind, it was one of those deals like, hey, I don't need a lot of money right now anyways, because I'm single, I'm on my own, and I kind of took pride. I always say you got to have alligator blood a little bit. You got to be able to survive on anything and be tough to kill, and that was kind of my thought process. I was gonna make this work as long as I could, and at some point, if I kept doing what I was supposed to do, be who I was supposed to be, and honoring God, He was going to take care of me at some point. And honestly, crazy thing, now 16 years later, obviously there's been so many opportunities between now and then. You say, hey, that was the reward, but really all the people I was in that building with and the places they have gone and the network that created by just sacrificing to do that was the reward, because those relationships have paid dividends down the road. And being put in that situation where I had to work and sacrifice said a lot to those guys, which allowed them to put their name on me down the road in other situations. So, to young guys, I always kind of get a chuckle, as I'm a little older now, and guys say, hey, could you help me get an analyst job? Or you help me get a GA job? Or you help me get this? And my first question is, well, how much are you willing to work for? Like how much? What's the lowest number you can manage from a pay standpoint? And everybody's got different where they are in life, whether it be family or single or whatever. And I always just get a crack out of some of the responses in that, because I just kind of chuckle and say, man, yeah, I don't. If you really want to do this, you got to be willing to sacrifice something. You know what I mean? And that's the way it works. And I've always been, again, with that in mind. Again, this comes from my upbringing. That you got to be 150% better than the guy you're competing with, because if you're the same, you got to bet on it not happening for you. And so you gotta find a way to bring more value than the guy you're competing with. And for me, back in that volunteer stage, for me, that was hustling and recruiting as best I could from within the rules, of not being on the road. But camps was a huge deal, and not just working the camps, but organizing the camps, organizing sponsorships, showing I could go out and recruit people to invest in our camp, and all that kind of stuff. And so when I was a volunteer, I helped the camp director just round up sponsorships. We rounded up in the first year $125,000 worth of camp sponsorships out of thin air, and I was slinging pizzas during the camps and slinging stinking Twizzlers and Gatorades. But we were trying to, just trying to find a way to generate money for the whole staff. Well, as well as I do, when a coach says, hey, that guy helped me make, more money this summer in my camp check, that guy all of a sudden has value,
Exactly.
and then obviously, parlaying that into being a helpful GA, having some content knowledge of what we're doing. And so I was a volunteer GA with the O-line, which as a defensive coach and special teams guy, I feel like that was a huge thing at the start of my career. I did that for a year. I was with the receivers for a spring, O-line for a year. And so, that at the end of that second spring, I just basically went to talked to the head coach, said, hey, what do I got to do to, A, get paid and B, parlay this into a job here. And to sidetrack off that, my wife was from Peoria, Illinois. So I met her while I was playing arena ball. Illinois State was where this was at. That was in Bloomington Normal. So we were trying to kind of navigate through a relationship there where I saw her, very rarely saw her, and that was part of it too. It's like, you know what, I got a really good setup here where there's a lot of help around me right now. I need to find a way to make this work, because let's call it like it is. I way outkicked my coverage there. And it's like, hey, if I'm going to go travel around the country right now, I'm probably going to lose that other part of this whole deal. So anyways, Illinois State was a really good fit for me. So I said, hey, what do I got to do to get paid here, to start my career here, and he basically said, you got to get your own room. So I went down the street to a D3 school, and I was the safety, Illinois Wesleyan, and I was the safeties coach down there. That was my first paying job for $750 for the whole year. And so I was the safeties coach and did some stuff, special teams there. And then so that was after year 3. So at the end of that year, I interviewed for a job up in Chicago, Benedictine College, which is another D3 school, linebacker's job. And it was going to be I was pretty excited. I think it was going to be up in the 30s somewhere, living large. But I was pretty excited about that. I got that job. I left that Friday from the interview. It was probably 2, 3 o'clock. I was supposed to move out of my apartment that weekend, that Saturday. And regardless if I got the job or not, I was supposed to move out of the apartment. And it was kind of one of those deals like, all right, it's just time. I gotta start living a little different now. And I was driving back from the interview. They'd offered me the job, said I had the weekend to think about it. And it just so happened that there'd been some things happening at Illinois State as I was driving back, where there was an opening on staff. And this is in April during spring ball. And the D-line coach at the time, Spence Nowinski, which is who I worked all those camps with closely and gotten very close with him, he called me and just said, hey, I don't care where you're at, you need to get in this office right now. And we're going to get you we're all going to help to get you this job. You need to get here right now. Well, it was a linebacker's job, and that was linebackers kind of is what I played, is my wheelhouse. So I was still in my suit and tie from the other interview, and I pulled into that office. And the funny part is because how you work in an environment, you think, hey, I'm making it. I know I'm building and everything. I've been there for almost 2 years. I walked in and the head coach, I had forgotten that he hadn't pronounced my name right in 2 years. So I go in there thinking I'm getting a job. He said, Jake Schoonover, it's great to see you again. I said, yes, sir. So I went back in there and basically he brought me in because he was a D coordinator at Purdue. He's linebacker coach at Purdue, Brock Spack, and a very great defensive mind. He had let the D coordinator go. He was going to take over D coordinator role, and he wanted someone to help him with the linebackers. And basically what he needed was a guy to do their job, not rock the boat, keep their mouth shut, and help. And so that was, I got in the door because of those qualities. So he hired me back as the linebacker coach, but really I was his assistant. And that first year I basically did that role. And about halfway through the year, he said, all right, I can cut this guy loose. So he gave me the linebackers about halfway through that year. And then that next year, I obviously was the full linebacker coach and gained the special teams title. So I was there from 11 to 17 full time as linebackers and special teams. And in that time, I love recruiting, and I had taken a lot of pride in recruiting, and I've always recruited basically the Midwest, whether it be Arkansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, Kansas, Illinois, Nebraska, Iowa, just the Midwest in general. And it's always kind of funny, again, just how do you bring value? You're always trying to bring value more so than the guy you're competing with. And for me, I knew my value was was putting more time. I could extend my value by putting more time in or doing the things other guys wouldn't do, and the time, put the time in they wouldn't. So I got to a point where the day we were told we could go on the road, okay, I'll see you Memorial Day. And I'd just be on the road for 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever it may be. And early on, there was a little monitoring to that just to make sure I was doing what I need to do. And then after we started getting some guys from the areas I was recruiting, it was like, all right, go do your thing. We'll see you Memorial Day. Tell us who you got, and that was, I always take a lot of pride in and appreciate, I'm very appreciative of the leash they gave me there to really recruit, because again, if I hadn't had that, I don't know if I'd be where I am now because of the relationships I was allowed to build through that in that time. So Illinois State 17, we made a great run. 14, we're in the national championship. 15, we're the number 1 seed in the playoffs. We'd had a lot of really good teams, and I love that. If I ever get a chance to be a head coach, that there's so many things along this journey that's going to help me. But when I got there as a volunteer GA, that was coming off a 3-win season prior, and watching the way from that day to the national championship to 2017 when I left, just watching the way the culture not just changed but maintained and sustained. It was really fun to watch, and I learned a lot about program building through all that. When 17 we kind of broke, some of the offensive guys were let go, and then a couple of us defensive guys were looking for other things, and I kind of felt like I'd gotten stagnant a little bit, and it was time to move, and so I kind of took a little leap of faith, and to be honest with you, made the decision to leave before I really had anything to leave to, and it's one of those deals where you kind of just say, hey, God, take over here and tell me where you want me to be. And I had accepted a job at a rival, and the HR process had taken, I'm almost tell you some crazy stories now about transitions now.
I love
God has really blessed me. And I had taken a job at a rival school and accepted the job, but the HR process was taking forever. And I got a call that my contract was done. I'd come over and sign it the next day. And that night, Carl Pelini called me from Bowling Green. He was the D coordinator at Bowling Green up in the MAC. And so I called the school I was going to, and the head coach there was phenomenal. He said, absolutely, you got to take that shot. You got to get a chance at FBS, go for it. So I went and got it. And even in that, again, God had a hand, because they had already offered the job to the other guy that interviewed for it before I did. And they picked me up 3 hours late from the airport. It was supposed to be like a 4-hour interview. So I got there with about an hour left, and just Mike Jinks was the head coach there, and just a tremendous human being. He was a former high school coach down in Texas, been at Texas Tech with Cliff Kingsbury, and was head coach at Bowling Green, and sat down and talked with him. And I've probably given you all too much here, but how you go to these interviews, you guys know this, you've been in a million interviews, and there's so many things going through your head about the things you want to make sure you say, the things make sure you want to show about yourself. And I'll tell you, the best interviews I've ever had is when I've just kind of obviously presented the content, but at the same time, just make sure they know who you work for, you know what I mean? And what you're doing, who you are. And that one was there's never more true of a scenario than that one, because the first page of my interview booklet was about being a servant leader. And I opened it up, and he looked at it, or he opened it up and looked at it. And I remember him looking, saying, tell me about yourself. He read that, and he looked up at me, and all of a sudden he started selling why I should come to Bowling Green just from reading that, which was just who he was as a person too. He wanted people like that around him. So then I went and talked with Coach Pelini, and we went through some stuff, and they offered me a job that night, and it all worked out. And I got out there. I was there for 3 years, but I got out there, and unfortunately, Coach Jinks, he got let go 6 games into the first season.
Wow.
And then Coach Pelini became the interim head coach. I was the interim DC, and I got to call plays there for 5 games, which was amazing, because I got there a day before spring ball, and it was a defense I'd been in the same defense for 7 years, and it was a defense I had never been, the bracket coverage stuff, had never been a part of it. And I thought I might get fired during spring ball. I was swimming so much with Coach Pelini. And Coach Pelini's one, I don't know if you know much about, obviously I know probably don't know who Bo Pelini is.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
they're those type of guys that when you're in, they will take a bullet for you. All right. But you gotta battle, wear some scars along the way too, and you got to understand that it's through love, but there's going to be some heated moments. And boy, that spring I thought I was gonna get fired. I was trying to find that defense so much. And then I got to call it by the which is a testament how great a teacher Carl Pelini was too. He taught me that defense very well. But anyways, had a little success there at the end of the year calling it, and we thought Carl was going to get kept. He did not get kept as the head coach. Scott Leffler came in. I did not know Coach Leffler from Adam, and we had a 10-minute interview to save our jobs, and he spent about 5 or 6 of it telling me how this is the hardest part of being a head coach is knowing you got your own guys and having to talk to other people, and I just told him I appreciate how hard it is for you, but I know you're probably not gonna keep me, but I'd love for you to maybe if I text you a year from now, you at least know who I am and put a positive thought to my name. And I kind of went into why I feel like I should be, I could bring value to him. And about an hour later after that, after it was supposed to be a 10-minute interview, about an hour later, he said, "Hey, we're gonna figure out a way to make this work." And I'll tell you what, I don't know if I ate, slept, or went to the bathroom for the next 48 hours because I went up to my office and I said, "I ain't leaving." they're gonna have to kick me out. So I sat up there and just made it hard to say goodbye. So he kept me on, moved me to safeties, and that was since that D3 experience. That was the first time coaching safeties in a while, and I was a special teams coordinator, obviously, and did that for 2 years. And again, you just talk about career path or just relationships and careers. We brought in a guy named Brian Van Gorder. Do you remember the name Van Gorder?
Old Georgia guy. Yep.
That's right. And I didn't know him from Adam. He didn't know me. He was old school guy now, old school guy. And I was a holdover. And even though I'd only been there for 6 months, I was viewed as part of the problem as to why it wasn't success by the people in the building because I was the holdover. You know what I mean? And Coach Van Gorder made it his mission to try to run me out of that building for about 2 to 3 months. And every day that was the purpose of the day is I'm going to try to get this guy to quit. And by about June, we just had just reached a spot in our relationship where it's like, all right, I'm staying. He ain't leaving. And now if I have any job I'm interested in the country, Brian Van Gorder will be the first man to call for me. I absolutely love that dude. He did amazing things for me and taught me so much ball, and just been a great mentor to me over the years. But anyways, was there for 2 years. Before the third year, I'd gotten a call from Kansas about interviewing at the convention for at the time it was a safeties job, and it was a lot of moving parts to it. Ended up filling the job before we got to the convention, but Coach Miles still wanted to meet with me, and they had gotten behind schedule a bit. So basically, my interview with Coach Miles at that convention was walking him from his room across the Nashville Convention Center to the head coach's meeting. That was my interview, and then waiting for an hour for him to do his head coach meeting and walking him to his car. So we had talked, and I had thrown some things out about recruiting that I thought were important for Kansas and Kansas City local recruiting in general, just because that was my home area, but nothing came of it at the time because they'd already filled that spot. Well, fast forward a year later, and they needed a special teams coordinator, and so they called me and I interviewed 3 times with him for a special teams coordinator and outside linebacker job there at Kansas. I'll tell you what, those are some of the most interesting interviews I've ever been a part of.
I bet they were.
There's some good stuff now. But so I got there, and then unfortunately 9 days after I got there, Coach Miles got let go.
Okay, let me stop you there because this is I remember all this happening. You get your big shot in a big Power 5 conference, and then boom, 9 days later, Jeff Long, who's former athletic director at University of Arkansas, lets Coach Miles go. What's your thought process? You got a family, you've worked so hard to get there, and all of a sudden, boom, this goes. You can go either direction on this deal.
Yeah, no, it was, and obviously you knew there was some risk going in. Coach Miles, I believe was in his 3rd year, and so you knew there was some risk going in that you got to be willing to deal with the fallout of it if it goes wrong. My thought was I didn't have any Power 5 on my resume in any way, shape, or form. So I got to try to fight. If I want to coach at that level, you got to get some. You got to get some of that on your resume. So even if it goes poorly, go do my job well and at least be something positive from it. Obviously didn't expect that. I thought that'd be after the season, maybe
Yeah.
9 days in. And so yeah, when you get there, I can't lie to you, I was in shock. I had no I didn't have an answer at first on what to do. I was there with a guy named Mike DeBoard, who had just
Yeah.
been hired as the offensive coordinator, and Debo had been there, done that in college football. And I'll tell you, unfortunately, shortly after that experience, Debo had a stroke and is not coaching anymore. But Debo taught me more in that few months of being around him and just again going back to the basics of control, attack your work, and let God take care of the rest. And it was funny. I was in a hotel. You're always in a hotel for a few weeks as you transition to new school. I was in there for a few months because I didn't know where I was going to live. I didn't know buy a house because we had and Mr. Jeff Long got let go too. So it
Yeah.
was. It was not only a head coaching search in March and April, it was an AD search
Yeah.
first. So that was March 8th. I got hired February 28th and coach, they got let go March 8th. So from March 8th until they hired the head coach on May 1st, we had no clue what was going to happen. And so it was the wild, wild west of spring ball now too, because we had an interim head coach, but it was, hey, you just do whatever you want to do to I guess basically to make your case, you know what I mean? And we had administrators and people out watching every day, obviously. So I would say there were a lot of factors, and I've had a couple of administrators, both those scenarios, Bowling Green and then again at Kansas, administrators that really looked after me and very grateful for the words they put in for me with the new head coach, because that spring was an interesting time because there were some culture changes that need to happen there at Kansas, and I would say those first 2 or 3 weeks, about every kid in that building hated me for the way we were doing some things on special teams. Just the attention, the change in attention to detail we had done on some things, particularly effort and focus. And but by the end of it, we got pretty close. And then Coach Leipold got hired, and I didn't know Coach Leipold from Adam. And he came in. We had competed against each other when he was at Buffalo, and had some success on special teams against Buffalo in those couple of those matchups. But I didn't know him. He did know a couple people that knew me, all the way back to the guy I talked about, Spence Nowinski, the D-line coach at Illinois State. That was a common connection. And then another guy at Illinois State named Jim Williams had a connection with him from back in the Nebraska Omaha days. And so there were a couple guys that vouched for me, but I did not know him. And then again, some administration at Kansas had spoken well about the things I'd done in those 2 months. And so he kept me around, and being a local kid that had ties to the area was a valuable thing for recruiting as well. So he kept me around. The unique thing about all that, and this is what, I was kind of liking this to NIL situations here, and what some things I think should be fixed about NIL. I got hired on February 28th, and I took what I could get to get in that door. Now, it was not a great contract, let's put it that way. But I could not leave over the next 2 months in that interim phase. I got offered a couple jobs at a group of 5 spots to go, hey, come be our coordinator, come do this. I couldn't leave because the buyout was too big. The buyout was 100%, and I just signed it. So I couldn't, and a group of 5 school wasn't gonna pay a buyout. So I had to sit there and wait to get fired to get another job, to go take another job. And
talk to us during that season. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, the mindset in the room, or leadership and the whole kick and caboodle,
Yeah, that year at Kansas, obviously that was the year one of a rebuild that they've done a great job with. And again, if I ever get to be head coach, there's so much from that year it's going to be so valuable, because Coach Leipold did just a tremendous job of building just the building block and the floor of how to build a culture and how to change a culture. And it was really impressive and fun to be a part of, fun to watch. I was helping with the defense, but I was primarily the special teams coordinator, and that was kind of one of the reasons I ended up leaving. I went there to be outside linebacker coach and special teams. And, Coach Leipold brought his whole staff in, and they'd been together for 20, 25 years, Whitewater, Buffalo, and they've done a great job everywhere they've been, and great dudes. But they had a lot of spots filled that I would potentially, fit, other than special teams. And so, that year, it was basically, you felt like you're in an interview for 6 months, that you just every day you're trying to show like, hey, I have bringing this value. It was unique. It was very unique. And it was, and obviously we were a little undermanned for the Big 12 at that time. A lot of their kids that were seniors this past year were all freshmen for us freshmen or maybe sophomores. And so they obviously turned into great players there at Kansas over the last couple of years, but they weren't back then. They were still pretty young. Those were a lot of the Les Miles recruits that were just young and ready to, young and raw. So it was an interesting year. It was like you said, just a lot of growth, a lot of there's a lot of learning. And after the year, we had very candid talk about just what my ceiling would be at Kansas. And obviously if I was going to be in the special teams lane, there were kind of some things that I needed to make that work. And I just told coach, like, hey, I'm gonna kind of look at some options out there and everything. And Coach Leipold was great and did some things to kind of try to work it out. But I was able to somebody had gotten a hold of Butch Jones and told him I was looking. And like I said, there's some contract things there that made it very doable to make that move to Arkansas State. And so I had to wait a calendar year for that buyout to clear, but was able to get to Arkansas State and everything Butch told me I could do from a growth and development standpoint, learning to be a head coach, being involved in a lot of things with head coaching. And I was coaching safeties as well as in addition to special teams. He followed through with everything he said he would. And again, that was kind of a leap of faith there. There are a lot of people look at that and kind of scratch their head, why would you go from Kansas to Arkansas State? But it was a move that I felt like it was going to be good for me long term. And one, I always learned if you do a specific thing in your career where this is your thing, and for me, it's turned into special teams, you better do it in a building where it's really important. Because if you're going to be in that lane, you can't, and that's what you're responsible for, and it's not important in that building, then your ceiling is going to be drastically limited. And with Butch is obsessed with special teams.
Yeah.
And I knew that. And so I said, okay, if I'm gonna be in the special teams lane, first off, he's gonna let me do safeties, and I want to stay alive on the defensive side of everything too. But if I'm gonna do special teams, then I'm gonna go do it somewhere where it's extremely important. And I think the production will provide more opportunities later. And so we were able to work it out and got down there and didn't have a phenomenal year as a team, but we were number one or number two in about every statistical category on special teams. Which, by the way, I think special team stats are the most overrated, most out there thing there is, because there's so many variables you can't control. But it's better to have good ones than bad ones, And we had a great year, and Coach Kiffin caught notice of that, and hit me up and interviewed with him. And it's kind of, again, just I feel like all my moves have been a God thing, just where he's put his hand in it and said, hey, you just shut up and be quiet, and I'm gonna put you where you need to be, and you better work when you get there. Because I had just signed a new contract at Arkansas State because the January window is kind of when things move, and there have been a couple really good group of 5 opportunities that popped up that I was really excited about, but I just wouldn't work financially with buyouts and different things. And so I just signed a new deal there at Arkansas State, and shoot, not a week later, Ole Miss called, and they didn't care about the buyout, so that worked out well. And there, there's a lot of other factors in that too. But obviously, been here 2 years now, and getting more involved with the defense. I'm helping with the DBs now. First year I helped a little bit with the outside linebackers. Last year I helped a little bit the linebackers, and now I'm going to help a little bit more with the DBs and still special teams. And Coach Kiffin has been great to me, and added some responsibility with just some different things, and I'm very grateful for time here, and it's a really fun place to work. Obviously, it's fun to win too. So,
well, and y'all been very successful. Let's go back to that Arkansas State time. You weren't there real long, and you talked about Butch Jones. We visited with him, had him on our show, and he's got a lot of respect for you. I mean, he's got big time respect for you. And you talked about him. What did you learn with him being, obsessed with special teams? He's a very detailed guy. What'd you steal or take from him and that part of it?
I took a lot of stuff. He's, again, and whenever you hopefully get a chance to be a head coach someday, and I feel like it's your job as you're training to take something from everybody. And with him, he did a lot of the same culture building things that Coach Leipold did at Kansas. And I always say there's a difference between culture and intentional culture. Everybody can get some good guys together, but when you intentionally are training people to make the right decisions and to see it the way you need to see it as a group, that's different. And I felt like Butch did a great job of training kids to see it the way we want them to see it as coaches, and a lot of different ways, details like you said, understanding why those details matter and add up. But I'll tell you one of the biggest things that I'll take from him, from a culture building standpoint, is, and I think he shared this at the coaches clinic there in Arkansas this year or last year, but the connectivity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you ever talked about the connectivity report, but I think, you know, people always talk about what makes, you know, great people great is just in a maniacal approach to whatever they find important, whatever that is, or to their craft. And I think that's, you know, Butch has a maniacal approach to culture. And he found a study that they did in the NBA about Steve Nash and about how every player that ever played with Steve Nash said he's the best teammate they ever had. And so they were trying to figure out why. Well, then they counted up how many times he physically touched a teammate, whether it be in confirmation, affirmation, whatever it may be, just, you know, pat on the back, pat on the butt, whatever. And it was like double the rest of the league, you know. And so anyways, Butch put that into play with us, and he had an employee on staff, actually a Northwest Arkansas boy, a kid from Bentonville, Hadley Gregg. Hadley was coach's personal assistant, and Hadley would count touches. We had a camera constantly filming practice, and Hadley would count touches during practice. How many times teammates touched each other in a positive way, in an encouragement way. And then they would count touches during the game. We'd have a touches leaderboard. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
And it started out where the kids were like, oh, okay, cool. And then they kind of made it a joke. You know, you'd see kids that never played, but they'd run around the edge of the huddle just touching everybody in the helmet, and because they're trying to tally up their touches. But then it became a thing, and it became like, this is a part of who we are. And I think that the reason that Arkansas State crowd has got that thing churned is because of the connection they have as a group. And that, I'll never forget that. That was absolutely amazing. Now, going back to the detail, he just helped. Butch does a great job of holding you accountable to what you believe in. And you know, whether it be with me on special teams or maybe recruiting philosophy, you know, you guys know it's so easy to sit in the staff room and spout off philosophies and ideas and theories. But then when you get called about why, you know, if you get called about why, a lot of guys will start to stutter. And Butch is going to call you why now. He can call you out on why. And he'll make you explain it and break it down, and you know, make you stand behind it. And you know, at that point in my career, I'd been doing special teams quite a while, and we, you know, I always laugh because Butch was calling out my whys a lot early on, because some things I was doing a little different than some of the things he had done in his career, you know. And then I'd say it was probably week 4 or 5, you know, he was on me about, I can't remember what it was now, punt return maybe. And I kind of hit a breaking point a little bit where I was about done with explaining the why. And I kind of probably responded a little unprofessionally. But that week we took one to the house, and the whys didn't get questioned as much. You know what I mean? But that's kind of how it should work in my mind a little bit too. You know, like you should be pressed on because it makes you a better coach. And I'm such a better coach for working there for a year, because I couldn't gloss over things just because it was the way it was the way I'd done it, or the way I'd been taught, or the way what was easiest. No. I'm going to explain why we're doing this, not just to kids, but to coaches. The other thing about him that, you know, you know this, coaches are just grown up, just older kids.
Yeah.
We're just older players. Like they're not a whole lot of specialists. Just we got a few more years under our belt, because we're going to find easy way out a lot. We're going to find, you know, the way to get, you know, just kind of get through the day on some things. We all know that. And obviously that's what makes the great ones great. And Butch didn't let coaches do that. Butch does not let a coach skate or float through. And so, you know, we had a 30-minute special teams meeting every day, a staff meeting, which that was really the only place I really had it like that. And if you had your phone out in that special team staff meeting, there's going to be accountability come down in some way, shape, or form. And if we went over a drill and then we got to the field and that drill was not done the way that we had said we were going to do it in that meeting, well, there's going to be accountability for it. And that's uncomfortable for some people, but that's also how you get better. And it was like that with everything we did. It was like that with our cultures, like that with the offense, defense. I mean, there's accountability there. And I think when you set a clear expectation and a standard, it gives you that freedom to have the accountability with everybody understanding what we're doing. Now, I took a lot from him, and I would not be here without him. You know, we actually had some real conversations about some opportunities and stuff here in the past month or so that I just really appreciate him for, you know, looking at me the way he does. And yeah, no, he'll be a big part of my journey if and when this thing gets to where I want it to be, for sure.
Well, and then you get the call, like you talked about earlier, to Ole Miss. Talk to us. This is a good story. Talk to us a little bit about that interview process and the whole 9 yards. Did you have any connection with Coach Kiffin or anybody on the staff before
No,
getting that phone call?
no, I didn't. I there had been an analyst here that was here the year prior that I worked with at Bowling Green, and he was an analyst here. His name was Seth Dagey, and and it's kind of crazy how it works. All right, and again, I'm probably sharing a little too much information on some of these things with you, but I had gotten a call about the Notre Dame special teams job, and I was supposed to interview with Notre Dame out at the combine, and I was supposed to interview with Notre Dame on a Saturday, and didn't work out. Coach had a hockey, he double booked basically, had a hockey game. He couldn't interview me. Well, on Sunday, Sunday night I got a call from Ole Miss. All right, and it was completely out of the blue. I didn't put two and two together until after the fact. Well, Notre Dame hired Ole Miss as special teams coordinator, and so I got a call Sunday night. Well, I texted Seth and I said, "Hey, you know anything about this?" He goes, "Yeah, I gave him your name." He wasn't at Ole Miss anymore, but he'd been the one that put my name in. So I got a call Sunday night, said, "Hey, Coach Kiffin would like to get on Zoom with you Monday night." And so I did, him and the D staff, because you know there's going to be a defensive element to it a little bit. Like I said, from that Sunday night to Monday night, I had prepared like I was going to be in that thing all night, and I I got my stuff together, and you know, started with philosophy, got on Zoom, started philosophy, and went, you know, started going through it. And like you said, I'd gotten about 4 slides in and realized that something was wrong with my presentation. I wasn't sharing it. And so I was just talking. They were just looking at me. It was like a blank screen. They had no clue what I was reading to them that I thought they were looking at. But once we got all that sorted out, you know, I just went through some philosophy stuff and just said some things that clicked with Coach. And you know, I prepared for a gauntlet, and it didn't really get to that. I think it was about 30 minutes long. And he said, I was getting ready to pull up some film. He's like, no, we're good. He goes, let me call you in 10 minutes. And he just said he had, you know, they'd spent all day watching a lot of my film. And he's like, I just want to know it's organized. You guys played hard, and both those things were true. And obviously your numbers back it up. And then, you know, he had said that, you know, the way he hires guys is he kind of gets as many references as he can. He throws out the top and the worst, and he had got some good ones. So, and I knew it, I had kind of connected the dots and a few people he had called, you know, and different stuff, but no, like I said, I think it was kind of a God thing, man, of just right place, right time. And, you know, he kind of steered my path the way it needed to be, and it worked out. And I'm awful grateful. This is a great place, and a great place to raise a family. And Coach Kiffin does a tremendous job with the staff and family and creating a family environment. And it's been a lot of fun.
Well, you get into that, and you've taken, and this is my question. I'll turn it over to Bray a little bit. Most people come out as coaches, you know, I was going to be an O-line coach. You know, that's what I did, or you know, or a receiver. And you got a position. What attracted you to special teams? A lot of people run from them because, number one, and you can back me up on this, everybody. But a lot of coaches don't know squat about special teams. It's all lip service. And
Yeah.
you jumped into that, and people run from it because a lot of times, you know, you get a punt blocked, you're gone. I mean, there's crazy things that can
Oh,
happen,
yeah.
but you've taken it and made it into a positive, you know, because y'all are ranked top every year in your return games and things like that. What was it? Hey, nobody wants to do this. This is my way in, or what's the deal with it?
Yeah. So the first time, yes, in 2012, our I remember I got hired back in 11 as just linebackers.
Yeah.
Jim Williams is special teams coordinator, one of the most organized human beings I've ever been around. And he got out of coaching. And in 12, I worked the receivers coach there at Illinois State. His name was Don Shula's grandson.
Yeah.
And And Coach Spack went to Shula because he was organized and he liked him and said, "Hey, I want you to be a special teams coordinator." Shula said, "Absolutely not." And he goes, "But you need to give it to Scooney. Scooney knows what he's doing. He'll be great at it." And so, yes, like to your point, I did it because nobody else wanted it.
Yeah.
And I was just young, trying to gain as much value as I could and get my hands on as many things as I could to help me and help me grow. And when I took it and when I started it, I never expected or even wanted to be just a special teams guy. I want to be first off, I want to be a head coach. I don't care how I got to get there. I just want to be a head coach. I don't care if it's special teams, defense. I don't care. But usually that's offense or defensive coordinator on the way. And so in my mind, it's like I got to prepare to be a defensive coordinator at some point. But I'm going to use special teams as on my way to get there. As time went on, I'll tell you, I love special teams for a few reasons. One, I get to coach all 120 guys.
Yeah.
And I love the relationship part of coaching, as we all do, and just the ability to have a relationship with, a tackle, an offensive tackle, and a corner, and a receiver, and a linebacker, or DN. When you're in your own position group, you lose that a little bit. Or even when you're just offensive defensive coordinator, you lose that a little bit. And so, getting to coach a kid on field goal, but also a gunner on punt. I mean, I think that's a cool deal to be involved in that and just, be able to get hands on the whole team. I always say your special team style of play is a reflection of the culture of your locker room.
Yeah.
Well, I get to influence that. I get to influence that more than other guys, and I do really like that. And I think that's great preparation to be a head coach if I ever get that shot. I know ADs don't always look at it like that, but because they want the sexy hires of the guys calling the plays. But I think that's a great way to prepare me as well. The other part too is every kid that comes to our campus that plays for us did not come to Ole Miss to be the backside tackle on KOR.
Yeah.
Not one of them did. You know what I mean? But I got to convince them all that it's really good for them personally and their careers getting the NFL, but also it's really good for Ole Miss. And not one single coach that signed their contract to coach at Ole Miss signed that contract to coach the backside tackle on KOR. But I also got to get them to, hey, we all need to do this. This is for us, not just for me or you. I guess it's betterment of all of us. So I really enjoy those parts of being a special teams coordinator because I think it's kind of back to the roots of what football is about a little bit, of that selflessness and getting to influence that. I also think that, when you talk, you say a lot of people don't know about special teams. I think there's some validity to that, but really the only difference between special teams and offense defense is time and space.
Yeah.
I'm teaching all the same fundamentals, teaching blocking, tackling, tracking a ball, setting, rhythm. KOR is just really power or zone. It's one or the other, you know what I mean? But it's from distance, you know what I mean? And kickoff coverage for me is really like a hot cover 3, but it's just from distance. We got to create layers, got to create, create pressure, create penetration, and we got to have guys force fit fold around it, and just from distance. And so, it is different because guys don't take the time to study it, but really it's just teaching fundamentals in time and space. And I think that's a fun part of it too. And I love teaching kids of how to take the weight room onto the field. And I think you get to do that a lot in special teams because of that time and space, if that makes sense. So
no doubt. I heard Urban Meyer say one time, he said the first thing he would do was look at the left tackle on kickoff return and how he covered or what he did, and he could tell how hard your team was going to play real fast. Bray?
Yeah. Yeah. And Coach, you mentioned, like you talked about, the fundamentals, they translate very well. And special teams cover such a large gambit of so many different things. You talked about every position, goes through you on special teams. What is one thing, one coaching point, one X's and O, one fundamental, one game-changing special team coaching point that you would bring to your interview day one, or you would tell a young coach, this is the top priority overall that you look for?
Well, yeah, I think that time and space element is important. I think if you can teach this to a kid, or if a coach understands this, how to teach it, that you can translate it to a lot. You can make kids understand how to play. And I talk about putting a clock in kids' heads. Okay. And it's different on special teams as it is offense and defense. Yeah. And I'll use punt, for example. Okay. the op on punt from snapper to punter is 2 seconds. You want it to be 2 seconds. Okay. And for every 10 yards the ball is punted, you want 1 second of hang time. So if we get a 40-yard punt, that should be a 6-second play from snap to the returner catching the ball. Okay. And so that alone on its face is cool and everything. But when you break it down into teaching technique, that becomes really important. Because as a punt team, as a frontline punt, the biggest problem people have with punt is understanding how long they need to protect before they go cover. Because they're only playing football where you do both, where your offense and then your defense in the same rep, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you can put a clock into a kid's head on how to handle the time and space necessary, right? They understand how to utilize the tools in their toolbox better, right? And so like let's just use a guard on punt. If he understands, I don't have to, it's different than zone, a run play on offense or a pass protection, it's different. I don't have to hold this until the quarterback throws it or until that running back gets through. I got to make sure that guy doesn't get to the punter in 2 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And so my footwork, my hands, my technique, my alignment, everything is built to get him off a 2-second line. And if I can get him off a 2-second line in maybe 1 second or 0.5 of my work, well, now I have more time into coverage. You know what I mean? And so, and then as I'm getting out of my block, how fast I do it will determine how much space I have to cover. And then as I'm running through what we call the speed zone, okay, we have different tools to make sure you don't slow down and stop. You're avoiding blocks on the run while utilizing your tools. Okay, so my point is, when you're asking like one thing to help guys understand, everybody's got cool drill work. Everybody's got cool things they can teach kids in a vacuum of, hey, do this, do this, do this. But if you can't put a clock in a kid's head to understand the time they have to work with,
Mm-hmm.
then it'll look pretty. You might have a couple good drill tapes, but you may not have a lot of good plays. And so that would be the biggest thing for young guys coaching special teams or young players is understanding the clock in their head that they have to work with, because there's so much space to cover, so much transition time from offense to defense or defense to offense that they have to utilize their tools quickly and urgently to be efficient. That would be the biggest thing. I know that's not specific to a special thing, but that's what I would teach is the clock in the head. And we set up our drill work based off that. So we have a combat zone, a speed zone, a finish zone.
Okay.
And so in the GPS area, everybody's got catapult trackers that monitor how far you're running, the intensity you're running with, all this volume. And so that's a big deal. Coach Kiffin, I've never been around a more analytical human being than Lane Kiffin. He is tremendous with that. And so we evaluate that every night as a staff on who's put in what numbers. Your weekly numbers gotta correlate with your Saturday numbers, right? So if you're getting a ton of high speed reps on Saturday, you got to get the right amount to be prepared for that. You can't get too many, can't get too little. And so special teams is a big way we monitor that. And so any drill work or anything I do, I have to set it up to where I'm not racking up their miles or racking up their intensity over a long stretch of space. And so I got to do a great job. I think special teams coaches have to do a great job of helping kids understand this is what we're doing, but you can't just look at this drill and say, oh, I got it done. You got to do it within the context of that clock that we're talking about, that 6-second clock or whatever that clock may be. And so you got to really compartmentalize your drill work to make sure they understand the zone we're fighting in right now, whether it be combat, speed, or finish, and how it fits into that 6-second clock because again, that GPS plays into so much of it now. Wow. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. That makes sense. It's great. Yeah. That's an incredible answer. And I guess to follow up is, you're looking into spring ball coming up. You've got practices, you've got some opportunities to install that clock in these kids' head. What does your spring practice special teams emphasis look like? Do you work closely with Coach Kiffin on what you're going to install and do and things like that?
Yeah, so we punt every day. We're going to do something with punt scheme every day. Mm-hmm. But really, punt's we might mix in some KOR here and there, but we don't do a lot of scheme, the other 3 units.
Yeah.
I think spring ball is built for a couple of things. One, technique, fundamental building, but also competition. And so we have about probably 8 different competition settings we put together. I split the whole team up into 4 teams. We let them have a draft. We'll have 4 captains, guys that have played a lot of special teams for us in the past. They'll draft the whole team, every single player on our team, even the quarterbacks. They'll draft the whole team. and we'll split them up and we'll do different competitions. So for instance, we'll have a kickoff return competition. We'll do an easy one. We'll do punt return. I'll have three on the ball punt team guys, guard, tackle, end, and we'll have 3 hold up men in front of them. Right. And we'll have a jugs machine shooting that ball down to our returner down there 40 yards down the field. And they got to give a quick, flash step on the punt team, and they got to go cover that punt. But we put them in between the hash, and so the hashes are out of bounds. So you got that middle of the field to work with. And then we put a point system based off how far they get that return going. And then we'll give them different things for loafs and blocks and the penalties and knockdowns and, all this kind of stuff. And so we'll build that competition out. And, if we got 4 teams, team 1 and team 2 are playing on Tuesday, team 3 and team 4 are playing on the other side of the field. And then, on Thursday, we'll switch up the matchups. And so we'll keep score all spring. I'll throw some quizzes and stuff. So you get guys that maybe don't get a lot of reps, like your left tackle, but I'll give him a general quiz of, hey, here's some special team principles you understand. So even those guys can get points. We'll do some field goal block competitions. I'll have some holding competitions for the quarterbacks just to keep them involved. And so we're basically trying to get everybody involved in some way so they can pick up the basic technique, they can pick up the basic terminology, and so I can see them go out and compete. Kind of the dogs of. And I'm trying to identify in the spring who are going to be my core guys. That core 6, 7, 8 guys where I can count on them to be on whatever it may be, 3 or 4 special teams, and I can count on them to give that effort I really need, because you're never going to be able to use everybody. And we don't use a lot of starters on our teams, just to be honest. Most of our teams are made up of those backups. And so I'm trying to find those core guys and come out of spring saying, hey, these are the dudes that are going to put it on the line for me, and these are the dudes that are going to understand what we're doing. So that's kind of the goal of the spring, other than punt. We're punting every day, and we're protecting every day, and we're making sure that thing's locked and loaded.
And you go through to find those core guys. You talked about the analytics of it, and Coach Kiffin is a big believer in that. What's it like working with Coach Kiffin in the office on these special teams and just in general?
Yeah, so what I appreciate about Coach, he really lets me do my thing. He's very hands off. He's not a micromanager, really, of anything. But he hires guys to do their job. And he's gonna let them do their job, and I do appreciate that about him. There's always going to be questions and accountability asked about, hey, are we doing this? Is this what's best? Or hey, I saw this. How's that? Explain that to me. But overall, he lets you do your job. From a talking just analytics of player workload, that's where I think he excels at. One of the areas he excels at, I say this in recruiting because I always meet with every kid that comes on campus. Hypothetically, if a kid's max workload on Saturday is 50 reps, where if they play 50 reps in a game, they're pretty good, but if they get to 60, they start to lack. They start to fall off. That's where we kind of all work together, and Coach does, I think, a great job of managing. If a kid's playing 30 snaps on defense, well, I'm going to get 20 snaps out of him on special teams. But if a kid's playing 55 snaps on defense, well, then, hey, he's not doing special teams this week. That's kind of how we work together to make sure we're maximizing the workload of each kid. And I think that's the way Coach looks at things. I say all that to talk about Coach. I think he looks at things different. He always talks, you'll see this on Twitter, some people try to think outside the box. He wants to create a new box. And he does that with analytics a lot. He does that with team camaraderie and culture. We will have a random pickleball tournament in the next month where our whole building is involved. And his mindset is, I want these kids to be really excited to be in the building with us. I want them to, in the NIL portal era, you can't have kids dreading coming to be around us. And so he wants kids to be fun to be around us. And I know that's not quite analytics as you would think it is, but there's an analytical approach to that, saying, hey, how can I make sure kids want to be here? Well, that connectivity, that culture, all those things, he really attacks that because he knows this is how we got to do it. From things I've learned from him, from a game management standpoint, he is a tremendous game manager. And again, that is heavy analytics, as you know, whether it be going for it on 4th down, whether it be, when to kick the field goal, when to, do whatever, running the ball, whatever it may be. There's a method to that madness, and he is always kind of up on what the numbers are. He might go with gut over numbers, but he's always up on what the numbers are. And it's been really impressive to watch. We practice so much situational football, more so than anywhere I've been, where he just, we might rep this thing 20 times and it not come up all year, but if it does, it's going to get on ESPN. You know what I mean? And he does a lot of that stuff where I think you're really ahead of the game for those key situations that we all know decide the game at some point.
Yeah, sure.
But the biggest thing with him is just how he treats everybody. He is, I've been really appreciative of him, of the family man he is with us, and he has one daughter here on campus. His son is moving here this summer, who's going to be a sophomore in high school, and I always say one of the best, most underrated attributes of a leader is the ability to self-evaluate, and Coach Kiffin is unbelievable with that. And I would say he's had. If you had him on this, his story would be pretty adventurous too, in different ways. And I would say he would tell you that, I know he told me, he goes, hey, you make sure you do everything you got to do to keep that family how it needs to be, because I want to make sure that, that you take advantage of the opportunities you're getting with your family. So, and I think he speaks from experience on that. That's pretty cool to be around and see a guy that can say that to you and understand.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question. I've got two questions here, but you talk about Coach Kiffin, about his dad. His dad just passed away this past year, and Monty, everybody in Arkansas loves Monty Kiffin. He was defense coordinator here for back in the day, and I've never got to met the man, but it just seems like even in his 80s, just had high energy and just a fun guy to be around. And I've had guys that work for Coach Kiffin, different spots, and Coach was always around, and they just said, man, the guy was the life of the party. Did you get to spend much time with the big Coach Kiffin in that process? Talk to our audience a little bit about him. Super Bowl champion, defense coordinator with the Buccaneers. I mean, one of the top defensive minds ever in football.
Yeah, no, Coach Monty was awesome. He was in the building the last 2 years until he passed away. I mean, up until a few weeks before he passed away. He'd come in for a couple hours a day on defense, sit in the room. And he like you said, a lot of energy and one-liners and all that. He wouldn't necessarily be engaged in all the schematical conversation, but there'd be about 10 to 15 minutes a day, or maybe every other day, where he'd snap in and say, oh, hey, and he'd go, whether it be a cover 2 corner or something, he was gonna bring up a point that, what amazed me about him is, in his old age, obviously we all know just how the brain works when you get older. He could snap into a 1997. We ran this play, this call against this offense and this set, and here's what so and so did, and Rondé Barber made this check, and Derek Brooks did this, and he would just lock into the exact moment he was in. He even told me one time, it was really cool getting him to talk about his kids and Coach Kiffin, or Lane in particular. He grabbed me one time, I can't remember what we were talking about, but he just snapped into a moment when Lane was in high school as a quarterback, and he was in an option offense, and he checked to a fade. And remembering sitting in the stands thinking, uh-oh, because they didn't throw the ball. And he goes, and that's when I knew when Lane was going to do his own thing, no matter what. So, awesome. It was cool. It was cool to be on that. And I tell you that, again, I know one Lane Kiffin, the one I've had the last 2 years. And that's the building I'm in. I know is, Monty Kiffin here, Chris Kiffin is in our building as an analyst, works with our defense. His niece is in operations for us. It is a family. Chris Kiffin's kids are in our building all day. They're younger kids. It is a family environment here all the time. And I think it's been really cool to watch Coach Kiffin with his family. And I think obviously Monty getting older and getting to the end stage of his life really brought them together. And as a byproduct, our whole building's been brought together because, one, Monty Kiffin was such a energetic person, and he just connected people so well with stories and with relationships, but two, it's kind of all made us kind of mourn together a little bit, but also celebrate together a little bit too. So it was a really cool experience being around him. It was you get a little awestruck sometimes, you know, you think about it growing up and seeing that on TV and seeing and knowing who he is and what he did for the game of football and getting ready to, you know, being able to sit a couple seats away from him. But it was once you get around and you weren't awestruck because he's just a great dude and great person and personable, you know.
One of the guys. Well, let's go back to this. Everything trickles down, man. And I know you've had this conversation looked at. NFL this year changed their whole kickoff process. Looked like it was very successful. Is that coming to college football? You probably maybe trickle down to high school. That I know amongst special teams guys, college has to be talked about. What do you see the future of that?
Yeah, I can see that happening for sure. I have not heard any details about that. You guys see those balloons go off in the
Yeah,
screen?
what is this? Somebody's birthday.
Great question, Coach.
Yeah, I don't know. We're excited to have you. We're celebrating.
That's right. That's right. Appreciate it. No, I can see that happening for sure. I think I have not seen any analytics on it postseason now of injury. You know, because obviously that's why they did it, was to take away collisions, take away, you know, potential concussions, but not just that. You know, I talked about the speed zone, combat zone, finish zone.
Yeah.
Well, that speed zone is where a lot of that soft tissue injuries happen. You know, and so I could see that. I could see those numbers being positively affected, where there may not be as many soft tissue injuries of that, you know, that 50, 60-yard sprint. You know, but I don't know those numbers, and I would say they're probably going to do a deep dive. And if they drastically brought down injuries, then yeah, you probably will see it trickle down. You know, I do think it's interesting. You know, there's been a big surge in the last handful of years of how much better the specialists have gotten.
Yeah.
The kickers, punters, and in large part because that's become an industry now. That's become the specialist the specialist industry of recruiting and coaching has become this other thing now, you know, where kids go all over the country to get training, and those guys have become very good now. And it's interesting because if you go to rules like that, it won't completely negate that specialist, but it changes that specialist a little bit. And our kicker this past year is a perfect example of that. You know, we had #1 kickoff team in the country according to PFF, and I had a tremendous kicker. Tremendous. I mean, he put the ball in the stands. I mean, it was unbelievable. Some of the things he was getting. There was one week we played LSU. He averaged a 4.7 hang time on kickoffs, which was higher than any punter averaged on punts the whole week. I mean, he was just tremendous. Well, a guy like that loses some value, not all, but some value in those kickoff rules because you're not rewarded for hang time. You know, touchback is still valuable, but not as valuable. You know, and so my point is there's just a lot of moving parts to that still that I think people are trying to figure out what, you know, the pros and cons of it and the strategy that you want to approach with it. I do think it would, I do think it would help the collisions. You don't get as many running head starts at blockers. But I have not heard if they're doing it. I definitely could see it happening though. I think it's realistic to think it would at some point if the injury numbers are backed up by it.
Well, we've had John here, and we got to ask you, like every college coach in America, Bray's going to hit a little bit. Let's talk a little NIL and portal. I mean, that's where it's going. Bray, take off with it.
Where's it going? What is next for college football? We hear these ridiculous stories, and you know we're on the outside of it.
Bray, well, let me stop you. Bray's still upset. He didn't get no He didn't get no NIL money, man. He did. He still campaigned to try and get something, man.
Yes.
I don't blame him. And I'm his agent now. I'm his agent.
Right.
We want to be paid, man.
I think I sat in your building when NIL was starting, and we talked about that exact thing about how you could have had a mean barbecue deal back in the day.
Oh, it'd be stupid. It'd be ridiculous. Wright's barbecue, JJ's. Oh, yeah. So anyway, but yeah, looking forward, what is next for the game of football with NIL?
Man, that's a great question. I think if you had the NCAA on here, they couldn't answer it very clearly either.
Yeah.
You know, because I just think it's changing so much, and I think that they're just so uncharted waters that people don't know what to do next. You know, I think you've seen over the last 4 years, there's been a lot of, hey, let's try this, and you kind of throw it at the wall, and then, oh dang, we didn't think about the fallout of that. We didn't think about this side thing, you know, and so you're just constantly kind of preparing the problems that we created a little bit. It is not sustainable in the current format. We all understand. I think everybody understands that. You know, I think the attempt of revenue sharing is that you know, the hope of the next thing that will help it a little bit. But I don't know that it will completely, because you're still going to have your outside collective that you can do other things with, and they're intending to make that more. You're going to have your revenue sharing from your athletic department budget. I'm sure people went through all that with you, and then you're going to have you're still going to have a collective NIL portion that's separate, supposedly, but there's going to be more stringent rules on that, on how you can attain that, how it was supposed to be originally be done anyways, about you actually have to do the work for that NIL money. Well, I think that's really good. I think that's really good on paper and on podcasts, but I don't know if it's the same thing in real life, and so I'm anxious to see that part,
And
Go ahead.
we sat here with Coach Orgeron, and he's talking about how recruiting used to be writing letters, to you and your mom and your family, and then Coach Pittman talked about these kids know how much money they're getting in other schools before they even come on your campus.
Yeah.
Are you part of those NIL conversations, or I mean, are you recruiting kids, giving them to Kiffin or that department, and so you guys figure out the money? I guess how much of that are you involved in?
Yeah. So, I look at, so first off, we as position coaches here at Ole Miss, we do not give any numbers out.
Yeah.
Our GM is the one that handles our numbers.
Okay.
And I think that's really important to keep it that way. Now, I've always looked at as my role as an information gatherer, not an information giver. When it comes to those departments. And so I'm always going to try to gather that information to know where things are at and what we're doing with it. I think we do a great job. Our GM does, Billy Glasscock. He came to us from Texas. He helped build that Texas roster that you just saw the last couple of years. I think he does a great job of laying out to our kids our process and our system of, here's what you're going to get when you're coming in the building. Here's what you're going to get if you're a starter. Here's what you can get you if you're a backup. Here's what you're going to get if you're a third string guy. And so there's no gray about, well, that guy gets this and I get this. Well, this is the value he brings, and that's why he gets it. And this is the value you bring. This is why you get it. And if you want that, you got to bring that value. You know what I mean? So I think he does a great job communicating that to our kids, and does just a tremendous job overall laying it out. I think that's probably been one of the hardest things for me over the years, because I know I talked about it earlier. Just I love the recruiting portion. I love the hunt and finding the kid, and then I love the relationship building. And in the old days, coming down and finding a kid from Arkansas at Illinois State or Bowling Green, I felt like I was going to out relationship and out information to signing day. Like when I was going to get them that name on that paper, and I out competed the school next door.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's my role anymore. I think my role now is to absolutely relationship and information, yes, but now my job is to get them to the negotiating table, because at the end of the day, that's going to really decide a lot of the finish line stuff, anyways. And obviously, the hard part for all of us is we always want control over our situation, and the reality is that that's out of my control now. The numbers got to match, and it's got to fit into our budget for each position and our each side of the ball. And sometimes it just doesn't match. Just depending on what you already have committed in the pot and all that kind of stuff. So those things are hard for sure. I think that if you didn't ask, but unsolicited opinion here, if we want to fix this at all, there's got to be some kind of I don't have a problem with buyouts. Like, I think that, I just told you my story about the places I left.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't leave Kansas at one point because of a buyout, and I had the different things going on. Well, Arkansas State, I hope they think it was like that. They got rewarded for signing me to a contract because Ole Miss had to pay them to get me out of that contract. And
Sure.
And I hope that didn't sound arrogant, but you know what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
I think in that, let's just use that current format again. If Arkansas State's got a great player, and they should be rewarded if someone else takes that player. You know what I mean? Or whoever it may be. I mean, and if a kid signs a contract and there's a designated amount of money, then there's consequences for breaking that contract. You know what I mean? I think there's got to be something in place like that. And again, let's call it like it is too. We all want to hold on to this illusion of student athlete, and I think that's what we all got into sports for. And that is a beautiful thing of being a student athlete and being around student athletes. And a kid is getting his school paid for, and he is a student. He's setting himself up for life, but he gets to play ball. Well, we're at kind of starting to get to a crossroads where it's like you got to make a decision. You want to be a student athlete, or you want to be an employee, and that there's positives to both, but you can't. It's hard to be both, and that I think until you get that discussion figured out, it's going to be hard to really get a plan in place to make it the way everybody wants it. I mean, and even the calendars. I know you guys have heard this. Just the academic calendar doesn't comply with the portal window or the coaching carousel or all those things. None of it, again, because we're holding on to the student athlete part of it, and I hope we do. I want the student athlete part, but it doesn't. It's not matching where the game or where the business has gone. So it's just until you get those things ironed out, it's going to be real hard to lay out a plan that's fair and sustainable. You know what I mean? And so I'm kind of speaking out of my lane there, but sure there's nothing you guys haven't heard already.
Well, that's the truth. And everybody forgets, the guy that they got to enroll in school in sometime. I mean, and nobody ever brings that up. You got to enroll in school and get in school and academics, and that never brings up. Changing process. Coach Kiffin, you guys barely missed the playoffs. The whole first year playoff system, new year this year, and new thing. I thought it was great. Teams, there's not so much you maybe can slip up one or two times. You guys kind of got the short end of the stick of it. A lot of people believe in. What did you take from the playoffs? What did y'all learn from your process through the playoffs, and where are you at now with it? What's your thoughts?
Yeah. Obviously I think it's a great thing. I think giving more people an opportunity to win a national championship is a positive thing. I think, like you said, having the ability to slip up, in September, October, I think is probably a good thing for college football. For us, it was disappointing because I'll sit here and say we had one of the at least top 5 rosters in football, and I'd probably go as high as 2 or 3, to be honest with you. I think the Ohio State roster is pretty special, but I think we had a lot of great players, and I think you're going to see that in the draft here pretty soon. And so, to lose 3 games by 3, 3, and 7 in the SEC, 2 of them on the road at tough places, LSU and Florida. And then to really, honestly, we won every other game by double digits or more, you know what I mean? And we got after a lot of really good teams. And that was hard to watch that first round of the playoffs, just knowing, all right, we should be there. But at the same time, we didn't make those plays when we needed to make them, and that's what you get. So, it's kind of one of those deals. It's hard to. Here, I'll tell you this, and you guys have seen every level of college football run through your area. I played D2, I coached at D3, FCS. Well, what's the common denominator in those 3 places for the last 30 years? They all have playoff systems, and I think it's pretty amazing that the first year of an expanded playoff system, and I know one name on that playoff committee, so this is not a shot at any of them, but why wouldn't you grab somebody from a lower level to be on the playoff committee? Because I'll tell you, all the years at Illinois State, we were in the Missouri Valley, and it was the best conference in the country, and I think I believe the playoffs were 20, maybe 24 teams at one point. We had 5 or 6 teams in the playoffs every year, and nobody cried foul because we were the best conference in the country. And it was always us, CAA, and Big Sky. And we would always have a bunch of teams. And you know what happened? Every year, it was Missouri Valley. It was 3 or 4 Missouri Valley teams in the semis or the quarters. The year we went to the national championship, we played North Dakota State in the same conference. And so my point is they found a way at those lower levels to regionalize it and to make it so the best teams get in consistently. And no one ever complains. You never hear a fight that so-and-so didn't get into the FCS playoffs. They had a shot to win it all. No, they didn't. They would have got in because they picked the best teams. And so that I know there's more to it than that. That's a very simplistic view. But I'll tell you what, I'd probably get somebody from the Missouri Valley on that playoff committee to help them understand how expanded playoffs work. You know what I mean? Because you look at that committee, there ain't a lot of SEC ties on it, especially people that have coached in the SEC. And until you coached in it, and I'll say this about myself 3 years ago, I didn't know. until you come in here and went into the swamp and went into Tiger Stadium and into Arkansas and into Auburn, and until you've coached in those places, you got no clue how it is in those places, because it is not easy, and it does not matter how good that team is over there. It's still hard. Because I'll say this, everybody, our black mark was Kentucky. Everybody said, "Oh, they lost Kentucky. They shouldn't. You can't lose to a 4-8 team." Well, I'll tell you right now, you put Kentucky, you swap Kentucky and Indiana's schedules, and Kentucky's in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And I'll stand by that. I'll stand by that to the day. You know what I mean? And so, that was I'd call out Indiana there, but I do think that there needs to be something done to help with the strength of schedule and just the way college football is right now. It's funny to listen to people complain about the haves and have-nots of NIL, but then at the same time they don't want to recognize that one league, and really two leagues, Big Ten's good, but two leagues are way better. Well, you just complain about how much they have, about how they got all the good players, but you're going to say they don't deserve to have more teams in. You know what I mean? It was tough. But all that aside, we lost the games. We win any one of those games, and we were in the playoffs and we roll. You know what I mean? So, it's on us that we didn't get in. But yeah, it was. There's going to be some tinkering with it. They're going to get it fixed, and it'll be a great thing once it gets going. But it's a hard thing. The SEC is a little different, as you guys know.
Well, it is, and it's week in, week out. And like I talked about, talking about Kentucky, and Coach Stoops over has done a great job. They're hard out anywhere. I don't care if you're home or on the road. And it's like that every week in injuries and the physicality. And the Big Ten, they got, they've got a great conference up there also. But how you sit there, you talk about seeding and things like that, which always been a big conversation. There's Oregon who's did everything perfect. Hey, congratulations, you get a bye to get Ohio State. Now, once you get there, everybody's good, obviously. But, the seeding part, I think that was the big deal. But it was exciting,
Yeah, no, and that's what it's about is getting more viewership and getting people to get excited about it, similar to the March Madness. And I think they achieved that. I know maybe the national championship audience numbers didn't show that, but I think overall they achieved just more exciting ball and ball that matters late in the year and again, go back to student athlete. I always laugh at that too. We want to be student athletes. Well, how about you cut the season down to 11 games? Because some of these kids are playing more than the NFL now. You know what I mean? We're going to play 12 and a conference game and 3 playoff games. I mean, but it is what it is. I mean, it was exciting for what. I think for the first year it was success, and I think it's only going to get better, and it's going to be great for college football once they get that thing really nailed down and figured out for sure.
No doubt. It's like we had Coach Locke from Ohio State, the running back coach, and we got tickled. They're the first team to win 3 bowl games in 1 year. I mean,
I bet they got a good little bag full of bowl gifts. From
he was fired up. It was like his first bowl game you ever been to. And he won 3. I said, man, you broke a record right out of the chute. You know how it goes. Right. Well, Coach, we'll get you off here, man. We appreciate you taking your time with us and getting back. I know you recruit Arkansas quite a bit, and you're all over the place, one of the top recruiters. And I mean, love watching your career. And the thing about it is, and I've got to watch it, known your brother for a long time, and the hard times, tough people take care of business, and you're a tough person, and you deserved everything you've gotten, and you're going to be a head coach one day, and it's just fun watching good guys succeed and watch all the hard work they put into it.
Yep. Well, I really appreciate that, and Jared, Jared's pretty dang tough too. So you kind of get, where it comes from. But, and I will say, I want to say how much I appreciate you and what you've done for Jared and his career and the relationship. He thinks a lot of you and really looks at you as a mentor and a friend. And I appreciate that. And, it's just been, God has really, really blessed me to be in this profession and just meet so many good people and in recruiting and get to go sit in schools and just develop those relationships, connections with like-minded people and like I said, I really appreciate you guys having me on and I love recruiting Arkansas, and I think it's a great spot for us to really do well in and get kids that fit our culture and our ability, what we're trying to build, and I hope I get to hope we get to pull some out of there again over the next few years. So.
Well, you're always around. I know that. There. Well, Coach, like I said, appreciate you coming on, man. And hey, we'll be checking your work and following you and pulling for you every game at Arkansas.
Awesome. Sounds good. I appreciate that.
There.
You guys have a great one.
See you, buddy.
Thanks,
Take
Coach.
care, man.